Today I'd like to share some thoughts from a letter of Pope Francis to the bishops of the United States that he wrote on Monday, February 10th of this year. He talks in that letter about migration in terms of the people of Israel and how the people migrated from Egypt back to the Promised Land. And the Pope mentions in that God is close to us and that God is a migrant God in the sense that Jesus, as he took on human flesh, was also subject to migration. And the essence of the Pope's letter is the importance of the dignity of the human person. Jesus lived that drama of immigration, and so Jesus knows it well. Jesus, when, of course, as a child, Joseph and Mary, they had to leave and go to Egypt and then come back. And Jesus himself, of course, in his ministry, literally says many times, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So Jesus knew that idea of moving around a lot. Pope Pius XII, in the Apostolic Constitution on the Care of Migrants, Exul Familia, which was issued on August 1st of 1952, talks about refugees, and that most who migrate is because of persecution, it's because of necessity. A lot of times they are forced to leave their homeland, and Pope Pius XII makes the same observation that Francis does, that the Holy Family of Nazareth certainly experienced this, so we are familiar with it from Scripture and from our history as Catholics. Pope mentions the infinite and transcendent dignity of the human person. And he says this surpasses and sustains every other juridical consideration. So the laws, certainly, the Pope is saying, are important that we look into the laws, and certainly have good laws, but a lot of times the laws can leave out this importance of the human person, which the law is designed to protect and enshrine. So our primary consideration is always the human person and the dignity of the human person. The legitimacy of norms and public policies must be considered in the light of the dignity of the human person and his or her fundamental rights, and not vice versa. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first here is the dignity of the human person, and the law is secondary to that. The law, of course, should always enshrine the dignity of the human person, and the law should always try to protect that dignity in every way possible. But if it is not doing that, if the dignity of the human person is being attacked, then that is the primary moral consideration that we have. Pope also mentions an issue that he is concerned about in terms of the United States, and that is identifying the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. If somebody is in the country illegally, it does not necessarily make them a criminal. And it's an important distinction. And we would all, of course, argue that we don't want criminals in the country. We don't want people who are doing violent crime. We want them removed. We want to be safe. It is certainly the function of the government to make people safe and to promote safety in every way possible. And we would all certainly advocate for that. That's very important. If somebody has committed a crime before arriving in a country, a serious crime, a violent crime, that person should definitely be removed and suffer the consequences of that criminal action. And similarly, if that happens when they are in the country, they should certainly be dealt with and be accountable. And the Pope, of course, says that's very important because you want to make sure people are safe. It's one of the primary functions of government. A lot of times we have to consider also the fact that migrants have left their land for certain reasons. It could be extreme poverty, it could be insecurity, it could be exploitation, persecution, serious deterioration of the environment. All of these are factors in terms of causing someone to leave, and so a lot of our laws, for example, with regard to refugee status and asylum seekers, really are based around those possibilities that people could encounter in their homeland. And of course, there's one thing to say, well, it's not our responsibility, it's the responsibility of that government. But what do we do when that government is not living up to that responsibility and a person's life is being threatened and they leave and come to another country? It's universally recognized that asylum should be granted to them. And of course, all of this has to be properly vetted. We must make sure that these claims are legitimate, and all of those cautions must be in place. Pope makes a strong statement about we can't build an immigration system on the basis of force. Force alone will not be helpful. If that's what we're using to back up our policy, the Pope says, is not going to ultimately succeed. It must be based on certain principles. And of course, the primary one for the Pope is the dignity of the human person. Pope says the human person is a subject with dignity who, through the constitutive relationship with all, especially with the poorest, can gradually mature in his identity and vocation. So for us to become mature people and mature in our faith, mature in understanding of the gospel, it's very important that we have a relationship with everyone, and especially the poorest among us. And the Pope says it's a beautiful thing in a way that to become a better person, a more mature person, a more loving person, the more I minister to those and help those and reach out to those who are in need, the better I become as a human person. The more I grow, the more I flourish, the more I mature in my faith and in my personhood. The Pope then takes on the question that has been debated recently of the Ordo Amoris. It was raised by our Vice President, J.D. Vance, who said that the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas should be followed in terms of what is the order in which we should love people. We often see it in that old saying, charity begins at home. We have to start taking care of those in our family, in our neighborhood, in our country, and not think of those so much in other countries. And it makes sense to us in the sense of, well, of course, we have to minister to those who are closest to us. It's very important that we take care of those. And the Pope says there is truth in that, but the Ordo Amoris really takes us to the gospel. And particularly the Pope recommends meditating on the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the Pope says in that parable it's obvious what Jesus is saying. A love that builds a fraternity and a close relationship with others has to be open to all without exception. So charity might begin at home, but it certainly shouldn't end at home, or it's not true charity. True charity is expansive. True charity includes all. The Good Samaritan didn't leave his brother by the roadside, but reached out and helped, and so that is our model of neighbor. Our neighbor is everyone who is in need. So we must try as best we can, with our limited resources, of course, to try to minister to all, and not just limit our charity to those who are closest to us. it should be much more expansive than that. Who talks about the personal and the community or the national identity apart from those considerations. And what can happen then is it can become ideological and distort social life. And it can impose the will of the strongest as the criterion of truth. What is truth is what I'm able to enforce. And Pope says, well, then you're putting that personal identity or that communal identity or national identity above your moral call to embrace all, to love all, and to recognize the dignity of all. We should try to defend those who are considered less valuable, less important, or less human. These are the ones that we are called really to reach out to by the gospel, those who are really most in need. And the importance of living in solidarity and fraternity with all of our sisters and brothers is what the Pope emphasizes. And I think that's a very important consideration in this moment. Pope ends his letter by talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe as she who knew how to reconcile people, even when they were at enmity with one another. Our Lady of Guadalupe was a reconciler trying to bring different cultures together. And the goal is a society that is more fraternal, more inclusive, and more respectful of the dignity of all. And it's a particular challenge in our time with the threat of mass deportations. We have to look at it, evaluate it, and say, well, certainly certain people who are criminals who have committed serious crime, that's something that we have to look at and obviously take a very close look at that and make sure that those people are held accountable, no question about it. But many times you look at the situation and say, well, somebody has been here for a long time, they haven't committed any crime, they have a family, they're living a productive life, they're paying taxes, and should they be caught up with everyone else? And so we have to have some discernment there and pose that question, say, well, what is best for them in terms of their human dignity? What is ultimately best for our country as well? We see the need for workers, the need for employment. Many industries are struggling to find workers. So there's a lot of factors I think that we have to consider, and the Pope is asking us to do that in light of the gospel, in light of the dignity of the person, and make sure that that is always central to all of our discussions about social justice, about what is right, what is wrong, and particularly the Pope is applying it to this issue of mass deportation and saying, let's be cautious here, and let's make sure we're doing the right thing for all.